104.5 The Team, your home for New York Yankees baseball. Pretty exciting game Wednesday night. Now, Buster Olney joins us, and Buster, I've theorized that this is the most important game of the year for the Yankees because it either is the kind of game that gets something started, or it's the kind of game where Texas looks over and goes, "Yeah, we'll take one of your closers." What do you think, Buster?
Well, what's your nickname?
Me, Pinstripe Pants.
Right, exactly. So
I never heard that.
You're one of the. You were the only one who was thinking that this is the beginning of something great for the Yankees. There's no doubt about that. Look, it was a nice win for them. I got to see a lot more of it and a lot more consistency in that team before you think it's actually leading to something. And it will be interesting to sort of see the reaction from the Rangers after that last night.
Now, Buster, you wrote about how the Yankees should proceed in trading Miller and or Chapman. What are the reasonable expectations for fans on the return of these guys?
That they're going to get excellent return because they are, if in fact they put them out there. And we heard Randy Levine, their team president, the other day talk about the idea of selling as nonsense, and it's not something the Yankees reflexively do. It's been more than a quarter of a century.
Yep.
But when you look at their place in the standings and you see how they're playing, it does seem that that they will probably put these guys out there. Now, according to executives, other teams, they're already sort of going through the process. They're sort of letting everybody know, look, this might happen. We might wind up talking about these guys, and there's no doubt if in fact they put Miller and Chapman out there, they're going to be the two most coveted players moved before the deadline, unless the White Sox decide to trade Chris Sale. And I think, with Chapman, it's going to be a lesser price to acquire him because he's a free agent at the end of the year. And because there's so many teams that are going to be interested, whether it's the Marlins or the Nationals or the Rangers or even the Red Sox, the Cubs, the Dodgers, the Giants, they're going to get good return. The Miller one, I think, is going to be really interesting because I think, from what I hear from other executives is the Yankees are basically going to have out there, look, we don't have to trade this guy. We think he's great. We could bring him back for next year. You have to pry him out of our hands with your offer. So here's the player we want in return from you. And if, for example, I think if the Cubs were to trade for him, they know that the asking price probably is going to be Kyle Schwarber, their young outfielder. And I think that's what the Yankees will do with all these teams. If you want Andrew Miller, then you have to give us this specific player. And if you're not going to, we got nothing to talk about.
Wow, Buster Olney joining us, 104.5 The Team. Now, Buster, the other name that usually is a flurry with trade talks is Carlos Beltran. Chances he goes, and did his value go down when he tweaked his hammy?
Well, it depends on the severity of the injury. For now, it doesn't seem like it's that serious, but he's having a terrific year. And given where he's at, having this good season, and given where the Yankees are at with Alex Rodriguez, I wonder if there's going to be as much incentive for them to keep him as to trade him. Now, who knows? Maybe the Royals call and make a decent offer. Maybe the Indians call and make a decent offer, although their outfield situation is getting seemingly better by the day. But keep in mind that Alex Rodriguez now has gone on almost a full calendar year since the last time he was a good hitter. And the Yankees have waited and waited and waited, and at some point that's going to stop. And what they could do with Carlos Beltran is give him a qualifying offer, which is going to be around $17 million 1 year, and say, look, you can sign someplace else, but we'd have to get a draft pick in return. Or if you bring him back at $17 million, you cut Alex Rodriguez, you don't have Mark Teixeira on the roster because his contract runs out, and then you have Beltran as your full-time DH in 2017.
I mean, Buster, everybody that I've heard talking about A-Rod says, look, the guy is finished. What are the chances that Hal and Hank are going to actually do it, pull the trigger?
Well, at some point, the practical realities kick in, and we've seen with Hal Steinbrenner's, he does not like to eat money. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I thought for sure when Alex went through his suspension and all that, that embarrassing chapter when he was threatening to sue everybody and was filing lawsuits, I thought for sure for the dignity of the franchise that the Steinbrenners would eat the contract, and they didn't because they wanted to extract the value. But what you said is exactly right. We now have such a large sample size, something in the range of 350 at-bats, which tells us that he appears to be finished as a player. He can't catch up with good fastballs anymore. He's being challenged more. He's striking out more. And I do think that as they discuss the composition of the team, if they keep him through the rest of this year, which is what I expect, then in the winter they'll be sitting in that boardroom down in Tampa, go player to player, and they'll say, he can't help us next year. It's time to move on.
Okay, so if he stays with the team this year, does that mean a guy like Judge doesn't get to come up, or do they find a way to work that out?
No, I think they're going to. I suspect that they're going to get an interest in Brett Gardner before the trade deadline. It wouldn't surprise me at all if they were to be able to move him because, he can play center field, he can play left field. He's got a great reputation as being a gamer. He's a great type of player for a contender to go after. And we're seeing it now already. I mean, they basically have said Alex is on the bench unless he, lightning strikes and he actually starts to hit a little bit. And I think that, at some point they are going to call up Judge and they're just going to say, look, this guy's our future. We want to position ourselves better for 2017. Let's get him as many bats and as much experience as possible.
Buster Olney joining us right here on 104.5 The Team, your home for New York Yankees baseball. Buster, the weather game earlier this week from the Yankees, and then, of course, the Rockies having their weather issues. You wrote an article calling for a weather czar.
Yeah, and basically my thought was, because as I had gone to bed, and I'm a light sleeper, and at 2 o'clock in the morning I woke up and I just checked the Twitter feed, and I see all these Yankee beat writers from Yankee Stadium saying the game's going to resume in 10 minutes, and so immediately popped up, watched the end of that game, and you're thinking, that's absolutely insane that they're sitting there in the first game of a 4-game series between these two teams, that they don't just suspend the game and pick it back up the next day. And it just seems like one of those common sense things to do, where you build in some sort of clause in the rain delay rules, where you give the power to the commissioner or to one of his assistants at some point under certain circumstances. They have the ability to step in and say, boys, we're going to change tonight, and here's what we're going to do tomorrow. Because any common sense in the world would have told you the other night that they needed to suspend that game and just pick it up the next day.
Yeah, in watching that, Buster, my concern was that field was such a mess that a player could have easily gotten hurt.
Yep. Oh, I agree. And look, I wrote that, all the players understand that, generally speaking, the show must go on. I've covered games that began in rain, ended in rain, had snow, cold, ridiculous conditions, and that especially is the case once we get to September and you're going through the playoffs, because the realities of the calendar start to bump up against it. Mm-hmm. That situation the other night, they didn't have to resolve that game that night. And that's what I think a weather czar would do, would be have the ability to step in and impose some sanity in a situation and shut it down and be able to tell both teams, look, come off the field, we'll wait for better conditions tomorrow and pick up the game in the ninth inning.
I'll bet if you asked the players what they would have preferred, it would have been that 100%.
Everybody. I think they all would have. I think the umpires would have. I think the umpires were in a terrible spot because you have these rules in place, and I'm sure that they may have had communication with Major League Baseball during the course of the night, and they're probably getting some direction on what to do. And the idea that you would resume a game on a bad playing field after 2 o'clock in the morning with 20 fans in the stands seems ridiculous.
It's insanity. Well, let's move to the Mets. What's the latest on the health of their pitching staff?
Well, it's a huge concern, and it's been interesting this week to speak with people with other organizations about the Mets' handling of Syndergaard and Matz, and it surprised some people because these guys present such a great future for the Mets, and for the foreseeable future, the Mets should have one of the best teams in the National League as long as those guys stay healthy. And so when Syndergaard went down on June 22nd, and he was diagnosed with, as the Mets told the media, no structural damage but inflammation in his elbow, the thought with other teams was, well, of course you're going to shut him down and make sure he's right before he pitches again. And instead, he goes out 5 days later, lasts just 3 innings. They acknowledge that he has this bone spur behind his elbow. Matz has the same thing. They are now 6 games behind the Nationals, and at some point, it probably would behoove them to go big picture on the situation and say, we just want to make sure that these two guys are good to go in 2017, because mathematically, our chances for this year are not that good. And on top of that, guys, it's one of the advantages of having a rotation that deep. Okay, let's say you do lose Syndergaard, you do lose Matz, or one of the two guys. You still have Matt Harvey. You still have Jacob deGrom. You have Bartolo Colon. You have Zach Wheeler coming back. Other teams would kill for a rotation with that kind of depth, like the Dodgers, for example. And you go to battle with those guys. And that's why it's been surprising that they've kept them on the field even as they're dealing with these issues.
Buster Olney with us here on 104.5 The Team. Buster, you just mentioned the Dodgers' latest on Clayton Kershaw.
Yeah, he goes on the disabled list, and again, it was a classic thing, and I don't blame teams. They're not obligated to tell us exactly what's going on, but what they announced to the media was that he had an epidural in his back. They didn't tell us what's causing the discomfort exactly, but for the Dodgers, this is a huge concern because this is a pitcher who has literally propped up this $250 million payroll just about single-handedly. In the games that Clayton's pitched this year, in fashioning one of the best first halves we've ever seen, they are 14-2, 12 games over 500. When anybody else has pitched for the Dodgers, they're 6 games under 500. And I tell you what, it's a reminder, too, to that front office, which has surprised people with other teams by not being more aggressive in trying to put together a team that could win a World Series this year. It's a reminder to them that Clayton Kershaw, as great as he is, Inner Circle Hall of Famer in all likelihood someday, he's mortal, and he's not going to be around forever. And now they have to go forward without him and try to find a way to win. And by the way, he can opt out of his contract at the end of 2018, so this might be a preview.
Let's move on to Lenny Dykstra's book. Now, you had him on the podcast this morning. How did it go?
It was great. Now, I will tell you that as someone doing that interview, because I'm well aware of the interview he did on Howard Stern and the different things he talked about on that interview.
Right.
And there were certainly things that I'm not going to get into on a baseball podcast. So I wound up spending a lot of time talking with him about his steroid use and his feeling about guys who were from the steroid era kept out of the Hall of Fame. And he also told me a really interesting story because I asked him about his time in prison, and he told me that while he was in prison, he thought of his former roommate, Billy Beane, who, the Billy Beane of Moneyball, the Oakland general manager, who read all the time. And Lenny said when their roommates, he'd look at him and say, what are you doing? No wonder why you can't hit. You're ruining your eyes doing all this reading. Well, when Lenny was in prison, he told me he read a book for the first time. And that led to a lot of changes within him. And it was actually a really good conversation, and I felt good about it at the end because he's thrown a lot of arrows in a lot of different directions, and I didn't feel like my interview went down that path.
There's enough of the I blackmailed referees, I guess, for the rest of us to
umpires,
learn. Yeah, umpires. I mean, that's just is that unheard of? I mean, I've never heard anybody at least admit to it. Is that something that happens?
Not in that direction. I've never heard that story. I will tell you that back in the day, and this was unregulated when I first started covering baseball, umpires would send over, and this is like 20, 25 years ago, and actually I believe at least one umpire that I know was indicted for this by the IRS. What they would do is they'd send over a bag of balls or, bat or whatever to be autographed by certain players. And I heard one story from one player specifically about being in the box and having he's hitting, and a pitch is about 2 or 3 inches out of the zone, and the hitter's surprised. He looks back at the umpire, and the umpire says to him, "Did you sign my balls yet?"
That is awesome.
And the message was sent, and the umpire got all the autographed baseballs he wanted after that.
That's crazy. Buster Olney, 104.5 The Team, your home for New York Yankees baseball. Levack and Wolf here with you. Buster, this question hurts me the most to ask because I have to admit that there was greatness in the 2004 Red Sox. What are the chances the two architects of that 2004 team, Theo Epstein with his Cubs, Terry Francona with the Indians, meet in the World Series this year?
Wow. There's a legitimate chance. There's no question about it. The Cubs are the best team in baseball, and so I think they have an excellent chance to march through. As we've talked about, I think they are going to make a big trade at some point this summer to get a reliever, whether it's an Aroldis Chapman or an Andrew Miller, somebody. And on the flip side, and I think we talked about this last week, to me, the Indians are like the 2015 Mets. They've got issues in their everyday lineup. It's not the most dynamic offense ever, but nobody can match them up 1 through 5 in their rotation. As of this morning, guys, out of the top 14 pitchers in the American League in ERA, they had 4 of the top 14. And the only reason why they didn't have 5 was because that guy, Carlos Carrasco, spent some time on the DL. He doesn't have enough innings. If he had a few more innings, they would have 5 of the top 15 pitchers in ERA in the American League, and that will drive them into the postseason. There's no way, in my opinion, any team in the Central is going to catch them.
Buster, where can we see your fine work this weekend?
We are actually going to be at Fort Bragg doing the first game ever played on a military base between professional sports teams. We're going to have the Braves. We're going to have the Marlins in North Carolina. I cannot wait. It'll be a lot of fun hanging out with the soldiers.
Absolutely.
That's why I love you, Buster, man. You still get excited about going to work.
Every day. It drives my kids crazy.
Buster Olney, make sure that you send it to me an insider. Check out the podcast with Lenny Dykstra this week. Buster, thank you so much, my brother.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Buster.